Everyone, welcome to the 13th live airing of Conversations with Cal, a series by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. We're really excited to have you here today, and thank you very much for attending. My name is Gabriella, and I'm a small business specialist here in the OSDBU. I want to make a few comments before we begin, and I introduce my boss, who's then going to introduce our guest today. First, you will notice that if you're not a presenter for this event, both your microphone and camera are muted and cannot be unmuted unless done so by me. Conversations with Cal will be recorded and uploaded to our website at some point, so please be patient with us. In the interest of time, there will be no question and answer session. However, we do want your feedback. If you have any suggestions about topics you'd like to hear more about, specific questions you'd like answered in a future session, or individuals you'd like to hear from as a small business, please send us an email at small.business@ed.gov. I will send that link in the chat soon, and we'll be happy to consider the content for this series. Please do keep in mind that all iterations of the series will be interview-based in nature. You may submit questions through the chat during the event, but they may or may not be presented based on timing and flow. And questions that aren't answered today may be answered in a follow-up event. Now that you have a better understanding of how this is going to run, let's begin. I'd like to introduce you to my boss, Calvin Mitchell Jr., or Cal, and he's going to introduce our guest. Take it away, Cal.
Thank you, Gabby, for the warm introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining another segment of Convos with Cal, or Conversations with Calvin. I have with me a guest. But before I talk about my distinguished guest, just a reminder of what we do here. One of the best ways to learn is from learning from someone who's done it already, right? Someone who's proven, someone who's been there and done that. And a lot of times you can learn from people who have been proven winners, right? And everybody knows the federal government space is very difficult to navigate. So I want to give you a master class in how to effectively compete in the GovCon marketplace. I want you to meet Jody. And you may say to yourself, why did Calvin select Jody Venkatesan as to be interviewed? I want to talk a little bit about who Jody is, and just to kind of build it up so you can understand what Jody can bring. So Jody is the president and CEO of Platinum Business Services. It's an 8A service-disabled veteran-owned small business firm in Maryland. And I just wanted to say right off the bat, thank you for your service. He was honorably discharged from in the U.S. Army. He was counterintelligence agent. He served with the 902 Military Intelligence Group at Fort Meade, Maryland. And he is a person that gives back. He's got a heart of gold. But again, here's why he's here today. In 2008, Platinum was incorporated. In 2008, Platinum was incorporated with $1,000. $1,000. Platinum has been doing around $13 million in annual revenue with nearly 100 employees. I left out. That's $1,000 and one person. That's Jody. Platinum is a prime contractor that holds a GSA and OMB best-in-class contracts. He is on a CIOSP3 small business with a services advantage business. 8A. He's on 8A stars. He's a prime contractor on multiple SINs on the GSA MAS and IT 770 schedule. He is a prime contractor with the Department of Health and Human Services, the U.S. Army, the General Service Administration Agency, or GSA, and the Department of Defense. He works extensively with large and small businesses. They provide a full range of professional IT, program management, and IT services. He's a proven executive with over 20 years of leading federal engagements. and has internal and external cybersecurity professional auditor, having worked for Marriott International and had been a public accountant for 10 years. So he's worked with several agencies all over, and he knows one thing, and that's how to grow a business. He is a growth agent, and I'm so happy he is here, because now he's going to be able to share his insights. And so, without further ado, I want to introduce to you Mr. Jody Venkatesan. Jody, how you doing, sir?
Good. Thank you, Calvin, and thank you, Gabriella, and thank you all for being here. When Gabriella said it was 13, now I feel like it's lucky 13. And I'll say one thing. Listening to all that, the one thing I can say for sure is, it's kind of interesting, how we all puff our own self up. It's kind of, the federal contracting will be one of the most humbling things you ever experience in your life. So if you ever want to be humbled, try federal contracting.
And thanks again for being here. And I'm glad you remember the dress code of the blue shirt. So I think we're already off to a good start.
Oh, good.
So, Jody, I want to start way at the beginning. Before you started your company, what were you doing, and what made you decide to start your own business? Let's start there.
Sure. I was a partner in a small, which I'd worked our way up in a small 8A accounting firm, and we had pretty much sold quite a bit of IT work, and the company really expanded rapidly. One could say that we were graduated out of the 8A program. They probably lovingly escorted us out because we did too well. But it was kind of it was a great learning experience for me in general, and that was really what was the impetus that started the business, because the managing partner at the time, brought me in. He goes, we're about ready to grow out of these small business categories. He goes, you need to start a small business. I'll help you out. So it was, and you can, work on it while you're doing things, and, kind of start from there. So to me, it was kind of like one of those moments I read about Home Depot. After they got fired and started Home Depot, one of the guys says he was hit with a golden horseshoe, and because he was bemoaning it and thinking about it. And I kind of had those moments. I was like, so I'm done here. And I was like thinking, and what am I going to do next? And, but then I kind of viewed it, from a retrospect as a golden horseshoe, but it wasn't always golden. So.
Yeah. And so, Jody, you explain, because we have a lot of small business owners, right, that are well established, and we have people who are kind of sitting on the sidelines and determining what their next step may be, right? Where they're at that critical point where they're trying to decide what the next step may look like, right? And so could you walk with us and just talk about what it was like tell it. So Jody is married with beautiful children, to telling your wife, hey, you know what? I know I got this job, but I'm going to start my own thing.
I don't think anybody believes you. You might not even believe yourself, for quite a while. So that's the truth of the matter. I mean, I'll tell you, I remember the moment, and I'll tell you, we were, and this is something, this is when reality slaps you in the face, right? And
yeah.
and remember, right around 2008, you had a presidential election, you had sequestration, you had the budget battle, you had the government shutdown. I mean, it wasn't a pretty time to do this stuff. I mean, somebody would tell me I'm totally wrong, but it was the moment that was the moment, if you will. So, when we started it, it was kind of interesting. We really didn't have a whole lot when we started. I remember walking in the bank, as you mentioned, with $1,000 and incorporating the business, and getting the account set up. There's nothing, nothing at all. And, that's a zero. That's a big goose egg. The biggest thing I was worried about was they're going to just keep charging me banking fees because I had no money in the account. And I was like, I'm going to, you can be out of business before, as I said, you can be dead in the cradle before you even started. Get out of the, the running gate. So what happened, after that was kind of extraordinary. There was some periods there of time, getting, probably from 2008 to 2011, which is, sounds a long time. right around there where we just ran up debt, which we weren't really doing anything wrong. Structurally speaking, nothing wrong, almost probably $400,000 or more, in total personal business, that we didn't, just trying and trying and trying.
Yeah.
And wildly enough, our first contract we had was about $150,000 on a subcontractor at HHS. It actually came out of a concession prize. Longer story, she just didn't want me to protest her. We scored a 98 and didn't get the bid. So, that was our first contract. How do you score a 98 and not get the award?
I tell you, I mean, that's pretty high bar. I tell you.
I'll tell you. And then,
it definitely wasn't LPTA, Jody.
Yeah, it wasn't a beauty moment. So we didn't do anything wrong. And then, so anyhow, so we go back to that, and I made about $10,000. We held on to that $10,000 in that account, netted into the account for about 4 years. And I remember the moment when we were down to our last dollars. And a lot of people don't know this, literally down to our last dollars. And I said to my wife, and she goes, I think we're going to have to spend that money. And she was crying. Let's just say that. And I said, it's okay, we'll earn it back. And from that moment, really just of trust, faith, and movement, I think things really, changed. But it was just, it's just getting through that moment, and it's not easy. That's all I'll say to anybody, and I'm going to say that, whether it be physically, emotionally, spiritually, it's just tough because you don't know, and you just have to keep working.
Yeah, and so and you and I talk about this all the time. Sometimes it takes that inner faith, right? That belief that something will happen, but it's always hard to get someone else to have that, to share that same faith and share that same vision. So, it takes a village, right, in terms of a network to kind of make that happen. And so I guess that last dollar didn't get squandered. I'll say that. So what happened next?
Well, our first big contract award was a prime contract with GSA. And actually, it kind of leads us to our schedules, because I just have a fundamental belief, and I kind of gone about this. I always say, build the airport before you land the planes. Kind of smart, but a lot of small business owners don't do this. I learned a lot by watching other guys not, make a lot of mistakes. But I focused on the schedules, the SINs, the past performance. See, this is the one key with GSA that I really think GSA does really small business a good favor. You're not penalized for the size of your small business, for the size of your whatever your past performance is. You're really not, in general, to get you on schedule. They really are fair in a lot of ways about that. So one of the things we learned was how to really navigate to get the past performance to get on the schedules. But our first prime contract was about a $3.9 million contract with GSA.
Hold on. You said your first contract was what?
$3.9 million with GSA. Yeah, it was a game changer. Yeah.
So how did that happen, Jody?
Well, it's kind of funny. Nobody believed we could win it. And oh, wait a minute, this is gonna be the kicker. This is where the world's gonna love it. So I forgot this part too. I'm glad you brought this up. So I was begging for partners, seeing what I could do. And so one night it was like 8:00. I was just watching baseball, and I'm still working, looking over things. I usually do that, watching baseball, because then I start watching the West Coast, keep working. And then I said to myself,
you can catch the games on the West Coast anyway.
That's right. You just keep watching it. So whoever's losing or winning, I'm happy. I'm just watching baseball. So, right. But then anyhow, so what happened was I got a phone call. It's like, we want to partner with you with this. And so anyhow, we did, and we didn't think we were going to win it. And it was right around Christmas. And I was actually at church on Sunday night, and I got a call and an email saying, we want to talk to you about this. And I was blown away from the CEO. I was like, man, this is awesome. I think we're going to win this thing. Well, this is the best part, the whole kicker, the whole thing. At the end of the day, we found out we were the only one to actually bid on it on GSA. Yeah. And there's a rule in the FAR that says, right, if you're the only bidder and it was on GSA, that's competition. Therefore, they had no choice but to award it to us. Now, they didn't tell me all of this while they were doing it. I found out later, but it wasn't anything negative. That just really shows you that what you don't know, sometimes what you think you don't know, and you got to,
Wow.
and so here's the inverse of that. So I said to myself, and I say to myself all the time, we don't know how many people are going to bid this. And that could happen again. You say, well, lightning doesn't strike twice. It sure does. There's a lot of contracts out there that do not, or net people don't really respond to. And I learned that and from that lesson, but that was the absolute game changer for our business. We went from literally 2-3 employees, me, my wife, and a friend, almost to
That's usually how it goes, right?
to almost 15 to 20 employees overnight.
Wow, overnight.
And paid off all that debt within 6 months.
Wow.
So, it literally changed the trajectory of our business. We became a real GSA provider. If you will, a vendor. We were paying our AFF fees. So, in that sense, GSA, we became not just somebody who was, provider as a SIN code contractor, but also a provider or vendor to GSA at the central office. So, I could go on. I'll pause for a moment, but that led to other work that I didn't know was ever going to come again. That literally came with a phone call.
So, okay, outstanding story. So, let's pull the thread. Okay, so how did you know? So I tell people all the time, the best way to start is GSA. And my work history, most people are like, oh, that's because you worked at GSA. So they stopped paying me a long time ago. So I really do believe that GSA is the best way to start out in federal contracting because of just the sheer access that you have across the board. But can you talk a little bit about what made you say to yourself, hey, I need to get on the GSA schedule and just start responding to RFPs?
So really, I learned from all the other failures and 2 other businesses, if we will, the mistakes we made, if you will. So I was in a mid-sized accounting firm, which was subsequently purchased, and then for a smaller accounting firm. The one thing I learned was we got to get on schedule. But what they didn't do was their schedules were so narrow in labor categories, SIN codes, and those kind of things. And the one thing I'll say, GSA was the easiest. I don't know. Maybe someday somebody will challenge me on this, but it's just been my experience that GSA has been the easiest gateway as a small business to get on. But the second that you get on, it's like the shot gun going off at the race. You've got to start bidding. I couldn't wait to start bidding. You got to just get in the game and just start bidding and start trying to figure it out. The only other place that I one time NIH had like a small business BPA they would allow people on with just a small thing. I don't know if they do that anymore. They allowed us on. And in fact, GSA even allowed for us to use that as a past performance. Wow. So it was extraordinary. We were welcomed in. And it's interesting, our CO, who was at the time Daniel Kim over at GSA, he was an intern.
Kim was your CO?
Yeah, well, he was an intern.
Oh my goodness.
He's
a good friend.
Yeah, he's just become an advocate because he's seen what happened, with just a little morsel, and it just made. And so we first got on the IT-70. And then the second thing we got on was the MOBIS, the old MOBIS. Now there's been a lot of change at GSA. And then the third one we got on was FABS. And at the time, FABS held about 22 SIN codes. And I go, well, let me see which ones we have past performance for. I mapped them all out, did you'd have 2 past performances for each SIN code. And it's interesting. I remember I was sitting there doing an audit in Jacksonville, Florida, at one of the Medicare providers, and I got a phone call, and they said to me, they said, who wrote this for you? I said, well, I did it myself. And they said, really, this is one of the best. This is GSA speaking. She said, this is one of the best ones we've ever seen. However, nobody applies to as many SIN codes. And I said, well, welcome to Mr. Nobody. And so it was kind of an interesting experience because she said, will you please? She said, the only thing you need to do is map them better. She actually helped me, but she said, you need to withdraw it. And I was like, that's really kind of got me. I was like, we can't withdraw, and it slows me down. I said, I need SIN codes. Right. And so what happened was then I flipped it back around. And I'll tell you this one thing, when I was doing my MOBIS, This is so important. This is so important to the small business community. I was sitting there doing my MOBIS. I remember on Christmas Eve writing our whole our price list because of a couple of labor categories, doing research. My cord on my laptop died. It was like 6 o'clock at night, and all the stores were closing. I ran to Best Buy within an hour, bought a new cord. I kept working until about 8 o'clock. I was doing it on Christmas Eve, but this only happened one time, so I'm not saying I work every Christmas Eve. Anyhow, so the kids were like running around eating cookies. I said, I get this in. If we hadn't gotten that MOBIS in, we wouldn't have gotten that GSA award for $3.9 million either. There's no eligibility. So what I'm saying is, so you're and this is so important. Your tomorrow is defined by your today.
Your tomorrow is defined by your today. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, your tomorrow is defined by your today. And if you don't work it and define your past performance, where you're going today, you will not have opportunity tomorrow. And you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring you. You don't know.
Let's pull a thread a little bit more on the GSA. So you determined that GSA schedule was the right way for you to go to really grow the business. Again, your first award was $3.9 million on the GSA schedule.
And nobody bid against us.
And nobody bid against you, right? And it's, I had a coach I played college basketball, and I had a coach, and I was nervous, right? Because I was the kind of guy that didn't want to take a bad shot. And he would always say, Calvin, you're never going to make a shot. You're never going to make a shot if you never take one, right? And that's kind of what it makes me think about here right now. There were some guys on the team, man, and they didn't know a bad shot. Like they were just letting that thing fly, right? They didn't care. And I didn't have that same thought because, you hear the whistle and you're out of the game. But I think it's important for everyone to hear that the schedule is a good way to start, and not only just be on the schedule for the sake of being on the schedule, responding to those RFPs that are in the wheelhouse, but also, like you said, mapping out the sins so that you're in a competitive marketplace. Because one thing that I know is true then and probably true now is it's not easy to add to the schedule, right? There's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, that's an interesting point that I go back and forth. I was talking about, even though I love GSA, sometimes I have a hate GSA. We have a love-hate relationship on occasion, but it's that's just because we're in a competitive world. But you've got to map your sins to your past performance. Now remember, the key to GSA is your commercial price list is yours. What you define is yours. I'll never forget, and I was at the table. They always, these big companies always take us out to these nice linen tables over in Roslyn or somewhere, wanting to show us that they're good. And I just smile and say thank you. So I remember on 2 occasions, there was this large business. He pulled my rate card because I said, we can compete. And he looked at me and he goes, you're a small business. And he pulled my GSA rate card out of my folder. And he looked at his partner and he goes, these rates are better than ours. And how'd you negotiate them? Well, you got to remember, your commercial price list is your price list. And GSA is very accepting. They're fair. They compete. They will go through their process, but they're accepting of your commercial price list. So whatever you define as your price list, as your commercial experience is what you define. So what I'm saying is play your A game in terms of your commercial price list. But when you get in there, as you add new, and that's the second thing I'd really say. When I say, your tomorrow's going to define by your today, you really your number 2 thing that's very important is where you start is not where you finish. And so a lot of people misunderstand that because your past performance, the government is going to take you in places where you may not have thought you had that past performance. And they're going to give you past performance that you didn't have. And let me just give you 3, that we've added that we were very fortunate to our 70 schedule, which is now mass. You got to keep following this. That's the other thing. It's always changing and evolving, but you got to evolve as your business goes. You can't just go, we're just going to sit there and, be done. You've got to evolve with the evolving, changing government, with all kinds of things. but we added HEAL, which was Health Information Technology, because we got 2 past performances. We added the Cloud SIN because we had 2 past performances, and we added Cyber early on when it was 45A through D SINs. Now we have all 5 hacks. Let me just fast forward, and I don't want to just eat up time, but the most important thing is last year, because that was our big year, which I'm not jumping ahead, but we brought in $35 million of cybersecurity work, all of which would not have happened if we hadn't done the cybersecurity SINs years ago. We were prepared. That's very important. Now, we didn't see that years ago. I mean, I can't predict. Nobody has a crystal ball. That's the big fallacy in this business. There's no crystal ball, but it's your job to be ready, and that's the hard part. Anyhow.
So
that's how I talk to myself. By the way, sorry, I'm not.
No, this is great, Jody. Like I'm sure everybody is feverishly writing down. So for those who are just joining, we have Jody here. We're reviewing his right now. He's north of 13 million a year.
Yeah, we're pushing it. Yeah, we'll see where it all lands. Yeah, it's all coming in. It's all
coming in. And I feel like every time I see the LinkedIn, they're getting an award. But he started with $1,000, and now he's built this company. He's got 100 people. And Jody's biggest takeaway so far is that he started on the GSA schedule, and built out the GSA schedule with several SINs, which he felt like he had to pass performance, and added the past performance. So Jody, can you talk to me about how you navigated that process early on? First off, we know you identified the schedules. You knew it was a pitfall. You knew not a pitfall, but you knew it was a place that you need to go, the schedules, because you knew the pitfalls from the previous business. How did you know which SINs to pursue? And could you talk to us a little bit, hey, I'm starting Mitchell's IT consulting company. But how did you give us the thought process of which SIN you decided to start on, and how you decided to kind of spin up?
That's kind of the irony of that. The only SIN they would let us on with our past performance was the 13251, which still exists. It's the general information technology one. So, which got us onto the 70 schedule. And then we were, the MOBIS, as I mentioned, was second, and there were only 4 SINs associated with that. So we had to do the proper mapping to our past performance. And what's critical is that statements of work or RFPs that you performed on have to have that language, generally speaking, to support that. You have to generate the price list and this and that, the submission. But generally speaking, you have to find those. So it's really a mapping, and that was over time. So, that was 2011. It wasn't until almost 2014 or so 3-4 year period where we were garnering past performance. And then we were also increasing our SINs relative to the schedules that were within our professional, capability, let's say that, and past performance. And so those, and let me give you one that we didn't get, because this is a beauty too. I got a call from GSA on the West Coast. I was out just riding my bike, doing my thing. I like to ride my bike because it's the only thing. Even in this heat, I'm not afraid. I just sweat it all out. It just all goes away. But I was out yesterday. But it's just, I do my thing, and so my phone rings, and I remember the very place I was at and everything. GSA on the West Coast. So like, is this Jody? Is this Jody? It's always like, is this Jody? And when they answer the phone, I'm like, of course it's me. You're talking. And you called my number, right? The phone still works. I thought, Thomas Edison was right. But anyhow, so they go, and so, hey, do you know about the OPM data breach? And I'm like, I've heard about it. They go, do you know you're the only company with all the SIN codes that can bid it as a prime? And I go, oh, well, that's a new one for me. I didn't even know this. I had no idea. So all of a sudden I put together a very competitive team, with some of the best companies in the world. Anyhow, longer story, we didn't get that award. It was an interesting thing. It was really some, sometimes you don't get the award, but it doesn't matter. The point is you were there. People remember they were the one to call. And sometimes, as I say, you get a consolation prize. You don't always get one. I always tell everybody there's no bronze or silver medals in this business. There's only gold medals. You gotta win the bid. But the point I'm making is, that's important, and it led to other work with other partners that, again, we would not have foreseen. So, because they're like, hey, he was easy to work with. We understood was his mission. We understood what he could do. Now, to get back even further, where I started is what I did in the Army, what I did in the accounting firm, what I had in the past performance, with information assurance and cyber. We were one of the first companies out there because it was GSA that said, if you can put cyber on a schedule, that's a good thing, information assurance. And I kind of remember the moment, and I was like, okay, well, we could see what we got. And, we were doing all of the audits for all the major financial systems, like for Medicare, and, some of the ones that went in, at HHS, with those for Oracle Financials at the time. So it really made a lot of sense in that regard.
So, Jody, I want to pull a string a little bit on the past performance. A lot of small businesses I talked to kind of struggle because they said, how do we get the past performance? What's the secret sauce for past performance? Where did you find your past performance early on? And what recommendations would you have for businesses that are looking? Because we know a key to your growth was the past performance, right? You were able to have the past performance to grow your SIN structure, right? So those who are not familiar with the General Service Administration multiple award schedule, the SIN is a special item number.
Special
right?
item number, yeah. Special item number.
Yeah. They're not real SINs.
That's
He's a good guy.
I'm here to help. That's all I tell you. The one thing I've learned, this is one thing I don't think small businesses understand. Even I didn't understand this. Yeah, a lot of things I don't understand. I mean, like I said at the beginning, you want to be humbled, stay in federal contracting. It'll humble you every day. You don't realize, that it's a very sophisticated buying process. Whether it be NICS codes and SIN codes and how your company is categorized by the Commerce Department or SBA, and this and that. But on the SIN codes, it's with GSA and past performance, this is one thing I'll say, and you kind of alluded to it. I just want to touch on it. I'm a contrarian at heart. I believe you got to swing the bat. I mean, there's a book that was recommended to me by professional. If you're a Nationals fan, his son used to play for the Nationals. His dad is a World Series ring. Got to listen to the guy. So anyhow, it was a talent code, and in there's a notional idea. It's called deep practice that we don't really talk about a lot. It's called deep practice, whether it be a cello player or a pianist or anybody, that when you do things over 10,000 times, you get better at it incrementally, whatever 10,000 is. Now, a lot of you don't want to wake up and say, I got to do 10,000 proposals. Well, I'm sorry, you might need to. But, there's a rule, and I'll say this as well, and this is not in the book, but this is just a statistical fact. Major League Baseball say this. I told you I'm a baseball fan. Major League hitter is not a hitter unless he's seen 750 at-bats. So what does that tell you as a small business? I mean, that's kind of interesting. Major League Baseball has you coming up from AAA to AA to A and up to the big leagues. And in some ways, past performance does the same thing to you. It's going to graduate you to those next levels. And even when we talk about where we are now, let me roll that back. I started out as a subcontractor, as a 1099, but I kept, getting it, I was hungry for past performance. The right past performance that would get me to where I could, document it to get the SINs that I needed to get on schedule. The first rule was get on schedule, and platinum, and it depends on your business model too, but we're built as a prime contractor, but you mature. And really, that's what it is, the maturation of your business from really a subcontractor, 1099, to, if you will, a subcontractor, to a prime contractor, to, if you can get there, to best in class in today's world. And that's really the goal. And then along the way, there's all kinds of IDIQs and BPAs and this and that. But it is inherently important to the survival and sustainability of your business that you have past performance that's going to support you getting what you're doing. And I'll say this: I tell people all the time, we don't sell product. We're not a reseller. We do professional services.
Yeah, and I really like what you said, because I think a lot of times I hear the whole discussion around, well, because I always say, even myself, when I'm speaking, I speak a little bit every once in a while, right? When I'm out there, I'm like, hey, subcontracting is a good way to start, right? And people kind of, well, Calvin, why aren't you talking about prime? Because I do think there is some importance to having past performance to be a solid prime. And I harken back to when I was a contracting officer, right? I always say I'm sobering up from being a contracting officer still. Still traumatized. But I remember I remember the evaluations and going through the evaluations process, and oftentimes it doesn't penalize you to not have past performance, right? You're generally rated neutral. But if someone has a little bit more than you, they're seen as more favorable in the best value scenario, right? But LPT, I'm not talking about LPTA. LPTA shouldn't be used in the services arena. I know it may be, and there'll probably be some backlash, but
you should have mentioned those letters. You can't
I know. I'm just talking about best value arena, right? And for me, I wouldn't even bid anything that's LPTA, because I think it's problematic, right? And right, I think it's a
it becomes a question of how do you get it done, because I mean, it's so important that we recognize the small businesses. The SBA it's really all defined. I mean, it's really kind of strange. But if you're if you're operating anywhere from 0 to 4 million, you're a little protected, because you don't have to have some of the overhead things that are necessary to get to that next level. But if you're operating anywhere from 4 million to, say, 50 million, depending on your NICS codes and size standards and all that other stuff, maybe somewhere you get all this little flexibility. The reality is you have to have certain things that are going to be it takes as much at 4 million to operate that business with overhead as it does to 40 to 50 to 60 million in terms of some of the systems and processes that you need. So your overhead on the business smothers you. It's weightier. It consumes you, and not to mention inflation. It's there, and hiring. So what you have to do, the only way you're going to do that is to get big. I mean, I really do mean that. And you have to put more. You're spreading your costs over more resources. Basic economics. It's just the way it goes. Now, in terms of the business itself, that's why it has to be on this growth track. But also, if you it's in the data too, by the way. The data, Bloomberg kind of said this. I heard NITAC say this at one time, which is another best-in-class vehicle. They said basically $7.5 million contracts and awards per year, typically from a data standpoint, go to large businesses. And that's a really frustrating statistic, because you got to get at least $10 million to 5 to get into the best in class. We only have one. So guess what I'm hungry for? I'm hungry for 3 to 4, 10 million, not to mention JVs and other things. 3 to 4, 10 million, it's going to get me there so that I can get the points, because at the end of the day, best in class is a points driven system, largely, point driven. So, and I want to say this as well, Calvin, and you taught me this, and you probably won't remember. I was walking in a hallway, literally at GSA when you were there, and I was really excited about our CPARs. The ultimate thing is your CPARs. You have to be, kind of psychotic, if there's a word about it, or crazy about CPARs as a business, because that is your report card. That is what you're graded on. You will not get points if you do not have good CPARs. And one of the things, being Army person, the one thing that was important was the OER and COER. I mean, as a federal employee, I know federal employees that start working on their evaluation report a year before that, because it's gonna, that's what's gonna make you for promotion. It's the same thing as a federal contractor. It's a federated process. And if you don't take CPARs seriously, and Calvin told me this, because I got like a very good, and I wanted an exceptional. And he says, at least ask, Jody. And I said, so guess what I do every time now? If I don't care if it's a very good or whatever, we ask and we defend it. And you have that right now within CPAR. So it's a good learning experience. So anyhow, sorry, there's a lot of stuff.
No. And I don't remember because we talk about almost everything every time I see you. But yeah, CPARs, I always say, is the bread and butter, and the contracting officer and the Corps are always open to be challenged. Don't feel like it's something that you have to stay with, right? If you get a rating that you completely disagree with, there's a process for you to challenge it, right? Even if there's one that seems reasonable and you feel like you should get more, why not ask, right?
Yeah,
More
you're
than
not,
like,
and people sometimes. Let me say it, if you're a large business and they give you a bad grade, they're not talking to the program manager, they're talking to their lawyers. And they know that. Now that's something to think about, by the way, to put it in your cap. But as a small business owner, you don't have legal fees and all. They know that too. So they kind of hold you. But it's nothing wrong if you can defend it. But one of the greatest things I'll tell you, and this goes hand in hand with past performance. This is why I'm bringing it up. It's not, the two they're linked. They're highly important to your future opportunities. So if you can't show good past performance, I'm gonna get back to point of fact here in a second. But when you show the CPARS ratings, like with those CPARS ratings, with you going back and asking for those things, sometimes what happens is in the second year they'll be like, hey, that's a good idea. I mean, we've had contracting officers do that. Now, the proof point I was going to get to that was, we started off this whole conversation with, we got this contract with GSA. About 4 or 5 years ago, I got a phone call. I was literally driving. I could tell you where I was driving, what had happened. It was on I-83, and I was going up to see my dad. And I got a phone call, again, just like I always say it happens. Is this Jody? Is this Jody? It was GSA Region 7. And what they had done, they had checked our CPARs relative to the work we did at GSA Office of, the budget. That work started off with 2.5 people, and right now today it's led to 3, maybe 4 prime contracts, in addition to recompetes, and almost 20 to 25 people. So it's pretty wild when you think about that. And I will tell you, the CO that called me, she scrubbed us and looked for that work. She looked for the past performance.
So I also wanted to say, Sam Lee and the guys at SBA, I mean, they're doing a tremendous job in terms of making sure there's flexibilities. I just want everybody to know on the call, if you are in a prime sub arrangement where you're the subcontractor, you now can you can ask the prime, if you're first tier subcontractor, for past performance, and that past performance can be attached. So just like Jody is saying, when you're building your prime credentials, that you can use the subcontracting past performance. Now you got to ask the prime for it. They're not just gonna willy-nilly give it to you. You gotta ask them and request it, and you can actually use that past performance. I put the article in the chat for those who think they may need that resource.
And Calvin, it's interesting in the community, Sam, mentioning Sam's name, he used to work in the Office of General Counsel, and I knew that at SBA over the years, but he's been a tremendous advocate. The other thing I learned, I was on a webinar. I do these listening as well, and he was he's now also doing the SBA's dynamic business search. And one of the things I'll say, and this we found work here this way too, is that has to be updated with your past performance. We've gone through that. Make sure it's current. Contracting officers are looking at that. He was talking about this, but I knew it would be true. They've also allowed you now, you can upload your capability brief to that. And contracting officers are looking there. And, I heard him say this, and I believe it to be true because it's happened to me. They found people and said, hey, we're good. We'd like to work with you on this. Can you come in and talk to us? So things can happen along those ways, means as well.
So let's talk pitfalls, right? We always talk about the glory. Let's also talk about those pitfalls. Are there any pitfalls that you look back and say, you know what, if I had an eraser, I would change this, or I would do this different as a small business starting?
There are so many pitfalls that'll bite you every day. I'm just thankful I'm not bit every day. I just say the truth. And sometimes, let's say it this so politely. If you start and run your own company, you got an ego. So you got to watch your own ego. You got to. I'll tell you that's hard to say it even to me, but you got to realize, that you got an ego, and that's okay. That's okay. But you got to also recognize, that it's there. And so I got to bite to myself on every now and again, but it's not, it's not meant to be bad or anything. But occasionally I got to watch what I do. But what I'll say is this. I was fortunate because I learned a lot from other people's mistakes. Because as I mentioned, I worked in 2 other small businesses, and they made a lot of boo-boos along the way. And so we've tried to do things that are process focused, people focused, and not personality focused. I like to say we're process focused and not personality focused. That doesn't mean you can't have a personality, because I got one for sure. But that doesn't mean but it does mean that you need to be process oriented. And we owe that to the people that work with us, for us, and the work we do, because people respond to that. I look at it this way. People want to know what they have to do, and that's why they're here. People aren't here almost 100% of the times to do something wrong. And that's one thing. Now, I will say this. I've said this very openly to the folks that work for us, that every decision we've been made has been a decision to move us forward. It may not have been a perfect decision. And one thing to keep in mind as you're going forward is there's no perfect relationships business-wise. There's no perfect people. If you can find perfect people, let me know, because I'd like to meet them. But, there's not going to be a perfect contract either. So it's going to be bumpy. But, that's part of the learning experience, is what we do.
Yeah, so I probably told you this. Greg Gorman was my GS-15 supervisor. And it's funny, I look back now as an executive, and I thought that if I could be a 15, I would be rolling in the dough, right? Anyway, I had a lot of silly thoughts as a young person. But anyway, so Greg would always, I was so nervous. I guess I'm just a nervous guy, right? So I was so nervous to make a mistake on the contract, right? And he always tell me, Calvin, he had this white beard, like he looked like a legit Santa Claus. If anybody ever knew this guy, legit Santa Claus. And he even had the little belly going, right? And he would always say, Calvin, the perfect contract is one modification away.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's what will surprise you, because when you're even doing contracts, you think you won your first contract, everything's going to be great. No, it's not. You still got to get to the finish line. You got to perform, and performance, is really where the rubber meets the road, and where the expectations really are have to be met. And so that's a learned experience. And one of the things I learned from one of the small business officers over at VA, and he's a good guy. And I'll say this, he says not every electrician is the best electrician business owner. They may be a great electrician, but that takes a bit of pieces there. And we've had to grow, but you've got to allow people to grow into things too in your own business, and that becomes critically important, because you have to share in that growth with them, and you have to recognize that they're not all there either. They're experiencing things while you're experiencing things. So that has to be, handled as well. So you've got the pressures of the work, the pressures of the people, and the pressures of where you're at. And like I said, the one thing I'll tell you though that becomes super critical, Calvin, you better be friends with your banker, by the way, and you better be thinking ahead of having financing. And lawyers and accountants, they'll always talk to you, but if you're not talking to your bank, I tell everybody I've got a very hungry appetite for capital and the money, because it'll strangle you, the growth of your business. I mean, I don't care how good you are. You could tell me you're the best business in the world, and I say it to myself, I'm the best business in the world. I'm better than, I have to say that if I don't believe it, but other people can believe it. But the reality is, if you don't have that capital, you can't make payroll, and if you can't make payroll, you're not gonna be successful in the long term, because people won't work for you, and that becomes very important as well.
So, Jody, I know we're near time, but let's start the pipeline discussion.
Oh, I love my pipeline.
Let's talk a little bit pipeline, and part two we'll definitely launch into pipeline, but pipeline is key. And we talked about this before. Where do you want to start in terms of what small businesses should know about pipeline?
Well, I want to talk a little bit about it metaphorically for a second, because, and I think I mentioned that to you. One of the shows I've watched for 10 years on Discovery Channel is Gold Rush. I've watched some of the guys grow up. I've watched some. I'm kind of a junkie on that show. But one of the most important things to that is you got to wash a lot of rocks to get a little gold. And and that's the one lesson I take out of that. And they're always saying you got to put gold in the box. These guys do this up in Alaska or wherever they're doing it in terrible conditions, hoping to make maybe $1 million or $6 million if they're lucky. And they pour it all out, and it's gold coming out. And it's funny because I think we take for granted a bit, on the pipeline, and we could talk at length on the pipeline, which we may do later. But one of the things I think people miss is, metaphorically, we talk a lot about pipeline in Washington. You got to be ahead of things. You got to be ahead of things. Well, there's some truth to that, and then there's some fantasy to that. The fantasy. Let me talk about the fantasy. The fantasy to that is a pipeline for a large business doesn't work for a small business, because the windows are shorter of time duration. The expectation is different. The market wants your pipeline to respond quicker because you're a small business. A large business is bidding on things in the multi-billion dollars that's going to be awarded in the next 5 years. They have a time horizon. You don't. Wow. But and think about that. And so large businesses will talk down to you and say, well, you didn't organize your pipeline properly. It's not that you didn't organize your pipeline properly. It's the time horizon is different. They don't have to have because their higher dollar values of their wins are greater. They don't have to get it. You have to get more smaller wins to be equally successful. Big difference. They have to get maybe one or two over the same period. And that's how they're measured. So think about that. The other thing with a pipeline, and this is why I go back to this metaphorical thing. Everybody talks pipeline. I don't think anybody's ever got their fingers dirty, at a pipeline place where they actually lay pipeline. They talk about pipelines, but it's just like a pipeline. If you're putting a pipe in North Alaska, and it's coming all the way down, all the way to the refinery, it's got to be running all the time. You can't have any periods of slow in it, and it's got to be constantly going from out of the ground to market. And when it gets to, and just because you get it out of the ground doesn't mean it's going to get to market, and to get sold. And that's really, when I go back to the whole contract thing, that's the whole point. So you're really looking for things to constantly feed it. And at the ultimate game, it's a statistical game at the end of the way. And you got to push up your numbers, and you've got to get good at it. And the way you get good at it is to really understand market research as well from a small business perspective. The one thing that changed relative to pipeline, which we do probably right now, we're probably producing close to 30 to 15 RFIs a week right now as a company. If you saw what we're doing. And that's because some of the things I've talked about, we laid the groundwork for those SIN codes and this and that. GSA said this the other week. The more SIN codes you get, the more opportunities you get, the more market research you get. It's just like that. And I heard it on their call, and I was like, "That's what we do, guys." Well, what happened is relative with with market research, it's changed dramatically, and I think the rule of two is being much more respected. Let's use that word.
It's true.
Across the small businesses and contracting officers. I think it's being more respected than ever before, and I really do mean that. And I think things have changed dramatically over the past 3 years, and COVID was a big part of this, because it used to be you'd have to go in, do your pitch before somebody, and you were limited by onesie, twosies, and this and that. If you could get a meeting and go through your PowerPoint and all these other things. Well, nowadays with GSA RFI research and MRAS, the MRAS tool by GSA, it's accelerating.
Put it in the chat.
So I encourage it, but your pipe, that will start the essence of your pipeline, because then you're pushing opportunities on top of real opportunities. And then, and I'll say this, and I'm going to throw a number out here, and I believe in this quantification. If you're going to hit your growth rates, you've got to have somewhere between 750 million and $1 billion of actual, bids that you submitted, because you're going to lose. And again, I keep going back. I'm a contrarian. And this, Calvin, this goes back to your question about 30 minutes ago. It's okay to lose, swing the bat, but you got to get up there and try. But you can't just, close your hands and go, woe is me. That's not going to work. Nobody cares. In fact, your competition appreciates that you don't try. I appreciate you don't try. Please don't try, because I'll be the only one that submits. Because right. Mathematically, we're out there looking and searching things. So, anyhow, does that answer it quickly? I didn't want to.
No, that's good. So Jody, obviously there's going to be a part two. In part two, we're going to lead it off with the pipeline. And I just thank you for being here, even through the technical difficulties. We really appreciate you working through the process and staying with us. And I think you gave a lot of good nuggets here for people to work on. So I'm going to turn it over to Gabby.
All right. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you so much, Jody, for coming along. We're looking forward to the part two with you. Everyone stay tuned. Hopefully you heard about this because you're on one of our email lists. If you're not, feel free to email us to get engaged at small.business@ed.gov. Again, thanks so much for coming. We hope you learned a lot. Send us your feedback. Send us more questions you have. And looking forward to see you next time. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take it easy, Jody.
See ya.